Okay, hi, welcome to Cherie's Weight Loss Journey. It is July 9th. I'm a little bit perturbed, right? We had gotten the alert that, a 15-year-old has gone missing. And determined would have definitely stopped this from going on, okay? But there was no deterrent at all. Instead, there was understanding of the misogynist manosphere that we understand why you do what you do. But hold on. Okay, hold on. And then, in the spiritual community, we started seeing mothers of sons of bitches defend the extortion of their sons. And we're going to talk about it. So, we live in a society where a 15-year-old girl could get abducted and turn up missing. Okay? Now, honestly, it's not happening as much as it used to, but it's still happening. Right? Because the average person would not believe that these type of behaviors are so bold that they would come out into broad daylight. Not even afternoon, not even after dinner time. Okay? So, yeah. Of course, my prayers go out to the girl that whatever she's going through, that she'll be able to survive it, and that in the future, she won't let whatever happened to her predestined, right? You know how men hate to talk about predestination. However, abducting a 15-year-old girl is not your way of projecting a horrible predestination for an innocent girl. I've listened to men who would say, well, if they had gotten raped, that takes away their manhood. Okay, so what does it mean if a woman gets raped? It takes away her soul? But let's keep it real, okay? Your soul is just the operating source that controls our bodies. It is not our spirit, the spirit that connects us to source. But these malignant, malicious, misogynistic men will try to tell women that no, it's not. Your soul is everything, right? And they will use soul and spirit interchangeably. Much in the same way, people in our society will use Lucifer, the devil, and Satan interchangeably. And yet they are different systems. Okay? They are different systems. The only way these systems exist is when you utilize that system. And I'm saying this because this 15-year-old abductee, right, is going to be terrorized by the manosphere in saying that now her soul has been taken hostage and then she's no longer in control of her own destiny, right? My prayers are that she realizes that her soul is separate from her spirit, and now she will have to, once, she's released, hopefully she gets released from this bondage that has happened to her. It doesn't matter if it happened through coercion. It doesn't matter if it happened through temptation, enticement, incentive. It doesn't matter if they actually truly just snatched her up and abducted her. Okay? As long as she gets out alive, then she still has her spirit. Whatever damages and stuff that they claim that they've done to her body, and therefore it affected her soul, that's something that she's going to have to reconcile for who knows how long. We don't know how long, because people grieve loss in their own individual ways. So now let's talk about that snow snatching, energy stealing manosphere that will marry women and then discard them. Okay? Now, they feel like they have the right to have a vendetta against this woman. In this vendetta, they had the audacity to call it revenge. It's not revenge, it's a vendetta. Why is it a vendetta? Because they had expected women to get into relationships with them and leave with absolutely nothing or crumbs. Some of them even have the audacity to say, well, you lucky you got your life, right? And there are women out there that will say all they wanted was their peace of mind. They didn't care if they got nothing else, just their peace of mind. Because you'll talk about these men that are out here, causing biocontamination, and they will walk around fire coming out of their genitals when they urinate, and they will not go see the doctor. They don't want to go see the doctor because they don't want it on their record that they were the contaminant. Okay? And they will go back to their spouse or to their living partner, their life partner, the partner that they're building some type of, existence with, and infect her, and it could be a him, and the one that gets infected by the one that was already infected, that did not want to go and get treated because of shame, right? They did not want receipts that showed that this was a person that was out there, cheating and initiating this biocontamination. That then the newly infected life partner has to go to the doctor because they're like, they're going to the doctor and, put a cease and arrest to the contamination, right? And then they go back to the partner, they got questions, and they're going to inform them that they too need to seek out medication. In the past, doctors used to prescribe enough medication where whoever had went to the doctor had enough medication for them and their partner. But the doctors aren't doing that anymore. They're not. So either they take the medication of the person that went to the doctor and then have, their partner go back and say, okay, well, my disease is not gone, and they already know that this will, sharing the medication will mean that the treatment will be longer. But the perpetrator is still operating underneath the radar. They don't have it on their record. They're getting treatment from the person that they had infected. They're using the medication of the person that they had got infected. Unless they're part of, a secret society. If they're a part of a secret society, and then they'll say, hey, can you use your connections? My partner went to the doctor, had an STD. This is the medication that, they're taking. Can you pull some strings and get me this antibiotic? And they do that, right? Because we're talking about people who have connections. People who have connections can do things in secret. Okay? So they're able to use their connections to get medication, and they're still under the radar. They know that they're playing against the odds. They know they're playing against the odds, right? Eventually, the odds, of avoiding HIV or AIDS or herpes or hepatitis, is against them, especially if they're very promiscuous and have no desire to stop being promiscuous. Okay? Like I said, usually once an STD is on the table, that's when, people start looking at their partner, realizing that this is the crossroad they never thought that they would have to come to in making a decision. Are they willing to die or to be indefinitely contaminated for that relationship? And a lot of times the answer is no. A lot of times the answer is now they have to find a way to get out of the relationship. If they're living together, if they're married, all of that is a whole process to try to get out of leases, to close joint accounts, and moving expenses. Even if you don't take no furniture with you, you're still going to have to deal with, moving expenses. Most places you have to qualify you know, first and last. And a deposit, you know, it starts to get pretty darn expensive, right? And usually the promiscuous person is like, no, you can't leave, you know. They didn't see nothing wrong with the setup that they had created. Okay? So, now, if they're married and a woman, you know, may have had children with them, and she survived. She survived the divorce, right? She may be allowed to live in the home. Oh, look at the peacock. Oh, I got to see this. Hi, beautiful. Hey, beautiful. Wow. Okay. She survived the divorce, and now she's able to live in the house, right? However, the proceeds will be divided accordingly once she moves from the house and they sell it. See, the misconception that a lot of these men will tell other men is that the house was given to her, right? The only time a man will give the house to the woman is so the value of the house, or his share of the house, will cover future child support, alimony payments, depending on, you know, where they live. And that's what that is about. Okay? Because many times when the men will go into divorce court, they go into divorce court unemployed sometimes. You know, they would choose to be unemployed. That way, they won't have to pay child support unless the woman finds out how much money he's making, and then she could take him back to court and have an adjustment on the child support, right? But men who, you know, of upper middle class, they're like, how about I just give her the house, you know, and you know, and you know, basically write off future child support payments in the form of his share of the equity of the house. Make sense? This just giving the woman the house is not what the courts do. Okay? They don't do it. They will let her live in the house so that the kids don't have to suffer dramatic change. They already know that change is stressful for everybody. And just because, you know, the parents are not seeing eye to eye, they try not to have it affect the children in the worst way, right? They will tell you that every change has stressful effects upon our bodies, good and bad changes. Good changes can also affect your stressors. Okay? Oh look, Alzheimer's and dementia care. Huh. So now, that being said, let's talk about what happens after the separation. Well, after the separation, many women experience a second wave of misogynistic men who see that this here is a woman, she has a home, she has some kids, and and he uses his imagination. His imagination in his mind is manifestation. That, he can make a proposal to this woman that he will help her with her mortgage. This was really a nice facility for Alzheimer's and dementia. I think it's very nice. Okay? Yeah. It looks like a whole apartment community in itself. Not like a hospital. That's a beautiful thing. Okay, so the second wave of misogynistic men come along, and they're like, I'll help you with your mortgage, right? If you give them, say, free access to your energy, to your body, right? And if they had said this up front, she probably would have considered it on a more serious basis. But they sort of said it like, I'll help you with your rent, and that way, you can save money. Right? And so she's thinking, this might be a person that has enough money to share. Right? And he may have had strategized that he'll pay her mortgage and help her and then devise a catastrophic event that's going to now enable him to ask her to allow him now to move in with her. Yeah? But it will have to be something really, really big. It will have to be something really big. That's why it has to be a catastrophic event. Right? So, this is where he's saying that whatever his living circumstances was, he can't do that anymore. And he suggests that, he moves in with her. Now, he doesn't want to marry her. He doesn't want to marry her. Because marrying her also demarks exactly when he came into the picture. Okay? He wants to get in and make it seem like he's always been there. He does not want any receipts to show this is this point in time where he actually, was committed, to the estate. Let's just call it the estate. Okay? So now he moves in. He wants to combine the money that he had been giving this woman to have access to her body in the same way that as if he had been there all along, which he had not been there all along. He was helping her with her mortgage or her bills or whatever, so she could save money, right? So now he moves in. He's like, it's just the same thing. The only difference is that, I just don't go home. And she might buy that. She might say, oh, okay, that seems a little fair. But she doesn't know how he's lassoing, her assets and her property and claiming it as his, right? Not unless these two start, traveling around as a couple. If they're now walking this earth as a couple, you'll have other couples who are like, hey man, what are you doing? And he's like, hey, I'm doing my thing, and they're saying, you doing your thing? And he's like, yeah, I'm helping this woman out. Right? And they're like, you helping this woman out? And he's like, yeah, And they're like, how are you helping this woman out when, you're trying to get access to her funds and her estate? And he's like, no, she has free will. If she wants to help me out, mind your business, right? So the men are like saying, well, are you gonna marry this woman? And he's like, no, I ain't gonna marry this woman, right? So he spends more time than he realized that he had spent with this woman, right? It's adding up. It's 10 years, 20 years in, okay? And he's still non-committal. Now this man, 20 years in, wants to go in front of the court and tell the court that he has made an investment into the property because he has been paying the mortgage, right? And yet the courts are like, how did you make an investment when you're living there and you would have to have paid to live anywhere? And a lot of them will say, okay, they could go and stay with a family member, their mama, their daddy, their brother, their homeboy, right? But if they say mama or daddy, they can pretty much say they can stay rent free. They can't really say that, if they were staying with, their homeboy or, cousin or something like that. So they usually will say, well, I could have stayed with, my mama or my godparents or my grandparents, right? And then, of course, the answer, the question will circle back to, well, if that's what you could have done, why didn't you? Right? And so he will say, Well, he wanted to be there to protect this woman and her children. Right? So this protection and provision was done voluntarily. There's no contract, right? In contractual law, anything of value over $500 has to be in writing in order to be enforceable. But these men will go to the courthouse and claim they have a vested interest on this woman's property and her assets because they had basically squatted themselves onto her property, her land, right? And she's trying to get them evicted off of her land, right? Technically, she's calling them squatters, cuckoo birds, right? Men who want to go into an already established nest and take over the nest, right? They're trying to do a takeover. And even if they're not allowed to do a takeover, they at least want part of the house, right? Without even giving the commitment. Because normally when a man goes into a relationship and they're not willing to marry you, basically they're still keeping their options open. And a lot of women think that they can handle that up until the point where they got life or death decisions that they have to make because they see that the man is not, monogamous. This is a promiscuous man, and having this man, around them can become a dangerous situation. It could be a danger to their health, and it can also be a danger to their safety, right? Because this man can get involved with who knows what kind of people that, whatever games that this man was playing, could also track him now back to her house and her kids. So I had watched this video where, women were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, right? Once a woman is left with the guardianship, they're also, in essence, the executor of the inheritance for their children. Nobody wants to admit that that's the case, but that is the case. Because once that man moves on and goes and has another relationship and maybe another family, that is why the older family has to protect themselves and the children in the same form as not only guardianship of available opportunities, but also executor to ensure that these children receive an inheritance, right? And that was reinforced in my mind, when I was reviewing Abraham, right? Abraham had 3 baby mamas. Okay? Abraham had 3 baby mamas. And for whatever reason, we can only make assumptions about what was going on at the time. That he felt like he had to go back to baby mama number one, who was the mother of Isaac, right? And decide that he was going to take Isaac and sacrifice Isaac. Okay? However, Abraham stated that, he didn't, he was told by God that, Isaac was a special child and that he should not sacrifice Isaac. Now, the way that was downloaded to me was, yes, Isaac was a special child. It was a special needs child. Okay? And during those times, special need children, they would sacrifice them under the understanding that special need children cannot survive on their own. And that to take care of a special needs child, and a special needs child that needed also care even when they become an adult, is a costly situation, right? Because now they would either need, a wife that was a nurse with a purse, or they would have to pay somebody to take care of this special needs child. That child was draining the resources of this man, which is why he wanted to sacrifice Isaac, but was told not to. Now, Abraham had 2 other baby mamas and children. And so what he decided to do, I guess, was to abandon those other baby mamas and those babies and decide to go ahead and assist Isaac and his mama. And true enough, the fact that Abraham had showed favor to Isaac, the other 2 families pretty much, faded into the background. Okay? Rarely mentioned at all after that. Now, getting back to saying that the woman in these relationships are now guardianship and the legacy holder of these children. We have a situation where in modern day times, these men are thinking that they could get with a woman, who's established a nest for her and her children, and he could just do a takeover. And she's like, no, I cannot give you what I don't own myself. And he's like, no, you're in guardianship of this money. You should be able to let me have this money. So a lot of them, they get access to the money under the guise of, a loan or an investment, and they never pay the woman back, right? And this pains the woman because now she feels like, oh my gosh, she's in derelict of her duties, and, you know, looking out for the future of their children. And, you know, she now has to figure out an exit plan away from this guy that has invaded her home and claiming that he has a vested interest in the house. Right? So he comes in talking about he has a vested interest because maybe he's done some remodeling and has paid the rent. And he's arguing that he's doing the same thing that a husband would do, even without the title of being the husband. This is how he, you know, breaks through to the men who are like, yep, that's exactly what I do. I have title, I provide the house, I pay, you know, I do repairs, I remodel, you know. And this is how he pierces the heart of these men that aren't supposed to feel this type of sympathy to a man that's with a plan of doing a takeover. Right? Because, like I said, I was watching this video and this woman was saying, you know, I cannot give you the money that is dedicated into raising, you know, my children, into ensuring their future, and also enabling them to have an inheritance even though their father has moved on to another family. That second wave of men do not want to hear that at all, right? That's why they don't want to say the date that they participated. They don't have receipts, you know, of the contribution that they had made. They don't want to talk about how the home already had a value. They want either half of the total value of the home, or, like I said, they want the woman to leave with nothing and to feel like, you know, the fact that she got away with her peace of mind is all that she needs. But she would be tormented to the end of her days for not, you know, fighting to make sure that her kids were going to get the future and the inheritance that the kids were supposed to have. And when she goes into the courtroom and the courtroom can't see that what she needs is justice, this is where we have even the justice system in derelict of their duties, because they got wrapped up in an emotion, and that's the emotion of the manosphere, that they feel like, you know, providing for a woman is so hectic, right? The woman is not going to the man and, you know, and telling them, you know, pay me for being, you know, your domestic servant. Pay me the same amount that you would have paid a prostitute. Even though she could, you know, if they're just going to say, you know, paying a viable existence with a woman that's already established is his grounds for saying that he has now invested into the estate that was supposed to be hers and the children. And if the woman does that, these men will also understand how many times a month or a year, you know, they have paid a maid to come in and clean the house. You know, how many times, you know, they had, spent money, big money on a prostitute or escort service, right? She could pierce their hearts that way. A lot of times she won't do that tit for tat type of situation, but she should. Well, no, she shouldn't have to, really, because the justice system should really see it for what it actually is. And if she comes into the courtroom and she's talking about, yeah, he was giving me money, but he had his own place, right? Or he was staying with his mother or family, because he said his mother or family, needed him, to help them, to remind them when they take their medication, or, to change their diapers, or, change their sheets if they have, an accident, do repairs around their house, etc., etc., etc. This is the type of stuff that, actually needs to be considered when the woman brings it up. Because 9 times out of 10, they will find that this man has stayed other places, that he was actually just paying for access to this woman, and then turn around and want to say, no, I was paying as an investment, and upon breakup, he wants to claim that his investment is vested to a portion of her estate, or her nest, or her pension, and whatever, without marriage. But I'm going to tell you, most of the time, men who don't want marriage, they are not monogamous. So it's not the same thing. And men have to get out of their feelings to believe that it is the same thing. That this is just a game being ran on their emotions by these men who are thinking that this is the best of all worlds. You can have, 3 baby mamas claiming 3 different families and making everybody, pay this man to be the cock-a-doodle-doo in all of these different hen houses. Allow these women to be the guardianship, to be the executor of inheritance for the children that was left behind by these men, and stop being a derelict to your duties. With imaginations, with obscure narratives. Because the man feels like as long as he gives you any amount of doubt, that he doesn't need proof. That works in criminal situations. That doesn't work in civil court or family court. I don't know how many times women have been sitting up here trying to get a man evicted out of her home, and he's telling the woman that if she gives him $6,000, $10,000, then he'll leave. They're not married. That's intimidation. That's extortion. That's what that is. And that's what they should be charged with. But because it's a woman and they don't see women as human beings, that he could go into her home and claim her as his property. Stop it.